This PowerPoint is going to be about genetics and inherited traits. This is the topic we will be learning about this marking period. What is genetics? Well, the definition of genetics is it is the study of genes and heredity. Genes are what determine all of your characteristics. These include your physical characteristics and a lot of your the way that your body works and the processes that happen, and all of the different things that determine like your height and your weight and what kind of diseases you're going to get when you're older, which you hopefully don't get any. These were all controlled by your genes. They make you who you are. They control your body processes, which, as I said, could determine, how long you live, what kind of diseases you get, all of those kinds of things. And all of your genes are passed on from your parents. Your genes come from your mother and your father. Half of your chromosomes will come from your mother, and half of your chromosomes are going to come from your father. Together, these two create chromosome pairs. We will learn more about this in a future lesson. Chromosomes are basically all of your DNA wound up into this little half X shape. And then when you have the two X shapes, they combine to create a chromosome pair. All of the chromosomes in your body contain every piece of genetic information that you need. All humans have 46 chromosomes. 23 of them come from your mother and 23 of them come from your father. Each of these 23 from your mom and your dad combine to make chromosome pairs, and that's where you get 23 pairs of chromosomes or 46 individual chromosomes. There are diseases that are based on chromosomes. This includes Down syndrome, which is a malformation of your 23rd chromosome, or actually I think it's your 21st chromosome, my bad. There's a lot of fatal diseases that happen during development, during pregnancy for women, that can cause the baby to not survive the pregnancy or die very soon after they have the child. Homologous chromosomes is just a more scientific term to describe the chromosome pairs. As we discussed, you have 23 chromosome pairs made up of the 46 chromosomes. These are your mother's chromosomes plus your father's chromosomes. Each homologous chromosome is similar in length, and their genes are basically in the same locations on the chromosomes. So your hair color is going to most likely be on one chromosome pair in the same area on the chromosomes. The way that genes transmit information is kind of complicated, but just know that DNA contains all of the genes in your entire body. And then this DNA is wound up into the chromosomes that create the chromosome pairs. As I said before, that's a very important subject to know for your exams and any future learning. These genes contain all the information that determines your traits, as we said before. There's a very specific process that creates the proteins in your body, which control the development of functions. Each gene that you have controls the protein creation. They all code for them, which you will get into in a future lesson as well. Your inherited traits are traits that are passed down from each generation. For example, your mother may have, brown hair. Then when you're born, you end up having brown hair. That is an inherited trait from your mother. If your father has blue eyes, but your mother doesn't have blue eyes, there's only a small chance that you're going to have blue eyes unless your mother has a recessive gene for blue eyes, which we'll get into in a later slide. Some examples of inherited traits are dimples, tongue rolling, your hair, skin, eye color, any allergies you may have, and medical conditions. What I said before about the blue eyes falls into the recessive alleles category, and alleles are just the varieties in your genes. Dominant alleles usually have a preferred, dominance over a recessive allele, and that will be shown in these Punnett squares, which display them all. They can determine which phenotype occurs, and phenotypes are what your physical appearance is made of. And then you have your genotypes, which is the genetic representation of alleles, and we'll see those in the Punnett squares. A Punnett square shows the probability of all allele combinations. In order to make a Punnett square, you have to have the genotypes of the mother and the father, or one pair and then the other pair. If the Punnett square shows a heterozygous trait, that means you have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. And the dominant alleles are typically displayed with a capital letter, and then the recessive alleles are displayed with a lowercase letter. So the heterozygous alleles will be a capital letter and a lowercase letter. And then you have your homozygous alleles, or combination of alleles. This is either dominant and dominant, or recessive and recessive. If it's dominant and dominant, you're going to have 2 capital letters, and if it's recessive and recessive, you will have 2 lowercase letters. Codominant traits is a little bit tricky. If you have 2 alleles, which are what's going to determine which trait you have, if they are equally dominant, that means that there's going to be a blending of the trait that is being expressed. So blending means heterozygous alleles, both traits will be expressed. For example, wavy hair, which kind of looks, like a mix of curly and straight hair, is actually a mixture of the curly hair trait and the straight hair trait, or alleles for the curly and straight hair. Codominant traits just create a combination of each trait. Sex-linked traits are carried typically by the sex chromosome, and that's what determines if you're a male or a female. They can be shown in a Punnett square, which we'll do an example of. And some of the disorders that can be caused by sex-linked traits are color blindness, which typically comes from the father, and then hemophilia, which is a blood clotting disorder, which goes back way to the Renaissance period with the queens and royal families. Polygenic traits is going to be the next topic, and these are phenotypes, which is the physical appearance from the traits, and they're controlled by 2 or more genes. These genes are represented at different chromosome loci, which is just the location on the chromosome where the genes are located. For example, height. There are several different genes that affect how tall you are, which makes sense because it can be based on how fast you develop, when you get your growth spurts, your metabolism, different things like that. And then if you need a good way to remember polygenic traits, just remember that poly means many and genic means genes. There's a experiment from the 1860s, and it was by Gregor Mendel. It was called the Peapod experiment, and this helped him determine or create the law of segregation and independent assortment. Both of these laws kind of created a new way of looking at genetics, and kind of was like the backbone of genetics. Mendel was one of the founders of the study of genetics. His experiments showed that alleles during reproduction, they actually separate, and that's why the offspring don't always exactly match the parents, because they can get either allele from each of their parents, and those alleles aren't always identical. So when you go back and look at the dominant and recessive traits, if you have a dominant trait and a recessive trait, the dominant trait is going to be expressed, but the one parent might not have that dominant trait, so you have to really look at the genotypes to figure out what the possibilities are of offspring getting the different characteristics, which is what we're going to look at in the Punnett square examples. So here we have a Punnett square problem, and if we have determined through experiment that brown eyes are dominant, which we're going to represent with a capital D, and blue eyes are recessive, which we're going to represent with a lowercase b. So here's the question. If a blue-eyed man and a homozygous brown-eyed woman, so the blue-eyed man is going to have two lowercase b's because blue eyes are recessive. So there can't be a dominant b. There has to be both recessive b's. So it's going to be a homozygous blue-eyed man, which you have to determine just by knowing that blue eyes are recessive, because recessive alleles have to have both recessive genes in the Punnett square. You're going to have two lowercase b's. You won't have an uppercase b. So a blue-eyed man and a homozygous brown-eyed woman, which means she's going to have two capital B's. If they have a child, what are the chances that the child will have blue eyes? Now I've written this out for you. So we take the blue-eyed man right here, and we see that there's two lowercase b's. And then we have the homozygous brown-eyed woman. And the reason that we specify that it's homozygous is because there can be a recessive allele here, but we have to know that it's homozygous to know that there's two big B's. So when we cross these and kind of like multiply them, we get these things here. So there's no chance that the child will have blue eyes because there's no lowercase b, homozygous recessive alleles. Another Punnett square problem that we have, this is where we get into the sex-linked traits, is colorblindness. So we know that colorblindness trait is carried on the X chromosome. If a woman is a carrier of the gene and her husband is colorblind, what are the chances her sons will be colorblind? Now, if you're a carrier of the gene, that means you carry a gene, but you don't represent it. So here you can see that the woman, which is represented by XX because men have the Y chromosome, the woman she's a carrier, but she doesn't have both of them. Both of her X's don't have a colorblind trait, so she only can see, she sees okay, she is not colorblind at all. And then her husband is he has the one X chromosome for the colorblindness, but he has a Y, so that X chromosome is enough to make him colorblind. So then we look here, and we can see how they multiply. And we know that from this, we have to only look at the men, only look at the boys that they're going to have, the probability of them having boys. There's a 1 in 2 chance that their sons will be colorblind. And that is the end of our presentation. If you guys have any questions, you can email me, or we can discuss this more in class. This is just for you guys to review, and I will lecture this in class as well.